and welcome back to the Shark Scale. Here we are with Volume 3 of the Shark Scale, the third summer of shark movies. And today's movie, the first movie of Volume 3, is Deep Blue Sea 2. We're just picking up right where we left off with Deep Blue Sea, and here we are with the second one that came out almost 20 years later and has nothing to do with the first one. Let's just get right into it. The story of Deep Blue Sea 2 is essentially, what if we took almost the exact same story as the first movie and made it worse? Okay, maybe that's starting off on the wrong foot. The story starts off and is about this woman who loves sharks. She's a scientist, so she's probably a marine biologist or something like that. She's giving a PowerPoint and seems to be down on her luck for funds. Of course she is. After her presentation for something, she is approached by this man who says she can work for his boss and make the big bucks. She said she will go check it out and is joined by a couple who are scientists as well. Everyone heads to basically this, and the audience watching the movie are properly introduced to the man in charge who is funding everything. He explains that what is going on here is they have taken 5 bull sharks and started feeding them this chemical. This chemical will enlarge their brains and make them smarter. The hope is that it works on sharks, so then it will work on humans, allowing us to surpass computers. However, it isn't long before the sharks become way too smart and start trying to feed on our human cast. While a few little nuances are different, the movie follows the original Deep Blue Sea far too closely for its own good, especially for the first hour or so. Feeling completely unoriginal and washed out, it feels like such a retread of the original that I might as well just go watch the original. The characters in this movie really were just nowhere near as good as the originals, and it felt like budget knockoffs. Nobody was really worth a damn, and you didn't care for them very much at all. They were all underwhelming, especially when it compared to the original. When the movie does eventually try to do something of its own thing, it's actually better, and that's certainly the highlight of the movie. It's just a shame that comes near the end of the movie. In addition to that, there are multiple plot holes that never actually get addressed, even by the end of the movie, and left me kind of scratching my head. Like why the main guy in charge of everything drinks shark blood. It never gets resolved, it never gets really explained. He's just kind of crazy, they say. The pacing of the movie could also use a bit of work, as throughout probably the first 40 to 50 minutes, a few points in the movie just came down to a screeching crawl, as the movie just dumps tons of exposition for little to no reason when it really just wasn't needed. The plot is a complete mixed bag as well, as it does have some decent elements to it, and it does have a tiny bit of originality at the end, but it's just far too boring and too much of a retread of the first movie to be anything other than mediocre. I would have rather they just try to do something totally different than try to remake the first movie with some slight tweaks and different actors. But enough about the mediocre story. How about the sharks' screen time? It's decent, it's not amazing, but it is good. The sharks are in the beginning, they're in the middle a little bit, not like a ton, but a decent amount, and then they're also at the end quite a bit. It was certainly less than the first movie, and the sharks are not built up as well as the first movies, but it's still alright. It's not great because that middle part, I feel like they just stray away from the sharks a little too much. They talk about them rather than just, showing them, like even in the background. Complaints aside, it was alright, it just wasn't anything special. When the sharks do show up on screen, how are the kills in this movie? I'll be honest, the kills are actually quite good. They're not the best you'll ever see, but they are actually really quite good. All of them are unique, and there's not a single generic one present in the movie. There's a nice decapitation, there's a nice one where the guy gets thrown into the air, and then we have the mini sharks, or the babies as they call them. This was probably the most unique aspect of the entire movie, as there's one point where a bunch of baby killer sharks go around trying to feed on our cast. These kills involve a lot of them just ganging up on humans, and lead to some of the more unique kills. But as a whole, the kills were actually good. Of course, not as good as the first movies, but they were able to do something of their own at least. At least they attempted something different, I will say that. In terms of CGI present in the movie, I will also say it's kind of a mixed bag. Whenever they use the practical effects, I think it looks fantastic. The practical effects look better than ever, really, and they should have just stuck to these as much as they could. And the CGI, I would say, is really inconsistent. It's very up and down. There are a couple scenes where I'm like, you know what, that looks alright, it's not terrible. But then there are other scenes where I'm just like, no, that looks super fake, it doesn't look good. The sharks look like they're running on an animation track. In fact, they just look like they're animatronics. It's really just mixed. It leans more towards good, rather than bad, but it's really not out of the mediocrity. Speaking of mediocrity, I think it's time to go over the last aspect of the movie, which is the acting. It's generally mediocre with nothing special to it at all. Nobody really gets past that ceiling of mediocrity, nobody stands out, and some of the dialogue in this movie just sucks. It's cheesy, it's not all that well written a majority of the time, and there were just too many times where they were trying to make it like the first movie with incredibly similar lines, similar motives, etc. I would have rather just had them do their own thing, but instead they kept trying to make it like the first movie rather than its own identity. The acting wasn't like horrible or anything, but it wasn't anything special at all. Even from the main woman, she was just kind of there. She didn't really evoke any emotion, even if she tried. She just wasn't that good. Sorry. The movie tries to make a few jokes here and there, and these just fell completely flat, like they're not even funny. Mediocre is the perfect way to describe the acting. In fact, mediocre is really the best way to describe Deep Blue Sea 2. It really does not get out of that level of mediocrity. It has a few parts to it that are actually decent to good, such as the baby sharks, some of the kills, and the CGI when it decides to be good. But it also has its share of flaws, such as it's just kind of benign acting, it's slower paced, trying to be like the first movie too much, and when the CGI is bad. Also, the lighting in this movie is out of control. It's either too bright, too dark, it's just too much of one color. It's not very good in that aspect. While not a terrible movie, it's not a very good movie either. It really can just never get out of the first one's shadow, and don't get me wrong, the first Deep Blue Sea, it's a fantastic movie, it's a true classic. So when you make a sequel like this, it's going to get compared to the first one. But when the movie just blatantly tries to make its own version of it, it's like, yeah, you're going to get compared to the first one a lot. And this movie, it's nowhere near as good as the first one. Of course, it doesn't have the big budget of the first one. It doesn't have those big actors like Samuel L. Jackson. But I think they still could have made their own decent little cheesy B-movie, kind of like the first Deep Blue Sea, but like doing its own thing. But instead, they just kind of struggled with it and honestly went through an identity crisis and then just decided to make it like the first one. Not all of the movie is bad. The end result is just kind of lackluster, and I found the movie more disappointing than actually bad, as again, I really quite liked the first Deep Blue Sea. So I thought it was a fantastic movie, so I had like decent hopes for this one, but alas. That's why on the shark scale, this movie gets a solid 3 out of 5. This was me being generous and like rounding up a bit to say the movie is quite average. At its very best, it's decent. However, at its worst, it's a lame sequel. It's not awful by any means, but yeah, it was just disappointing. Regardless, I don't really recommend it that much, especially when the first Deep Blue Sea exists. Go watch the first one. Hell, go watch the first one twice. I'd say you'd have a better time than this. All that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Got plenty of more shark movies coming, and I'll see you guys on the next shark movie. Have a good Christmas.